Hey everyone, it's the Procrastinating Professor. Today I'm going to continue talking about the new Bulge book for the German forces. And again, it's with thanks to Blitz Minis for providing me an early copy so that I could review it. A link to an article I've written about the infantry is going to be down below. But today I really want to actually spend a little bit of time talking about the Halftracks, because this book has a lot of options for Halftracks and very interestingly, very affordable options for Halftracks. So it's perhaps something that many generals want to keep in mind. So that's it. Within the context of this book, there are going to be two main companies that focus a lot on Halftracks. There are of course more, and there are of course options to include them in various other companies, but just for today's video, I kind of want to draw focus on these two because I think that there are some interesting list builds that can come out of this, perhaps something that we've not exactly seen necessarily before this book. So you're looking at the Brigade Armored Assault Company and the Brigade Armored Panzer Grenadier Company. For the most part, on the surface, they seem fairly similar. However, there are a few minor differences. First of all, the infantry choices are slightly different. The one on the left uses assault platoons, whereas the one on the right uses Panzer Grenadier platoons, which are kind of identical, except that their main weapons are quite different. So again, I've written an article about the infantry and I talk a little bit more about it down there. But essentially, you're asking a simple question. Do you want to use your usual rifle with your 16 cm range, or do you kind of want to trade that extra range in for added mobility? The ability to shoot at ROF 3, but being stuck at 8 cm and having your anti-tank 1 for when it matters may differ from person to person, so that's one thing to think about. The second thing to think about is that the availability is slightly different. So as you can kind of see down here, the Assault Company comes with mortars, whereas the Panzer Grenadier Company comes with the option of another platoon of 2 cm flags or triple 15 mm flags. So let's talk very quickly about these Halftracks. I think for the most part, all of us are quite familiar with the Halftracks because many of them are functionally similar to what we've seen. I'll talk about the flags in a moment, but one thing to note is that in Bulge, all of these Halftracks I'm talking about within these companies are reluctant, trained, and aggressive. What this means is that they are probably going to, well, they're definitely not going to live as long simply because they're going to be easier to hit. They're going to be more likely to run off. And of course, there is a small chance that, they may not make all of their skill checks. Now, the other thing to keep in mind also is that many of these are self-propelled, so they therefore would suffer, of course, from the natural penalties that all of these SP suffer from, which is specifically of the reduced counterattack, which means that they counterattack on a 6 and assault on a 6. That's of course not for all of them, I'm just talking about the ones that are self-propelled guns. So what are the differences between all of this? Well, I'm not going to talk too much about many of the more familiar ones. I'm going to focus a little bit more, however, on the slightly newer one. So let's first start off by talking about the platoon sizes. So the 15 mm and the 2 cm, well 20 mm basically. Flag platoons come in platoons of 3 or 6. The flamethrowers come in 2s, 4s, or 6s, whereas the mortars only come in platoons of 2, and the 75 mm come in platoons of 2 or 4. The ones that people are not so familiar with are probably the flag ones, so let's talk very quickly about them. Functionally speaking, they are predominantly identical with one another. Both of them have 20-inch range, anti-tank of 5, and a firepower of 5+, and of course, dedicated anti-aircraft. But what you're actually paying for is a difference in the rate of fire. So the triple flags essentially have an ROF of 5 and 3, whereas the 2 cm flag has only an ROF of 3 and 2. So functionally, a moving triple flag will shoot as much as a stationary 2 cm. This of course does come at a very slight difference in points. I say very slight because we're talking about 1 point for every 6 Halftracks. So that's really not very much. So I realized after recording the original video that maybe perhaps I should talk a little bit more about the other 3 variants as well, because there's a chance that some of you are actually starting the game with Bulge, and that's perfectly fine. So here we go, alright? So I've already spoken about the flag variants. Anti-aircraft, just for those of you who are new to the game, anti-aircraft may or may not see use. It really depends on whether or not anyone in your meta plays planes. So far, if I'm being completely honest, I've never seen anyone play a plane in my place, but it's probably just because of my local players not being people who want to play planes. Flamethrowers are pretty good. They are an interesting unit because of their flamethrower rule. It makes them extremely effective if they ever get to you because they only have 4-inch range. They do have an ROF of 4 whether or not they're moving or not, an anti-tank of 2, and their firepower, well, is subject to the flamethrower rule. The mortar, on the other hand, is an 8 cm mortar, so that's just an anti-tank of 1 and firepower of 4+ at 40 inches of range. But it does, however, have the option of firing smoke. So that might be useful if, for example, you wanted to get your army up across the board very quickly. You're not going to have enough smoke to cover everything because you have 2 mortars per company and you have quite a big footprint, I would imagine. But it's an option. Maybe perhaps you want to cover the advance of your flamethrowers. That's definitely something you can do. And for the 7.5 cm gun, it's an anti-tank of 9 with firepower of 3+. It has a relatively long range of 24 inches, and of course it has heat as well. So it's not too bad. An anti-tank of 9 gives it enough stopping power to deal with some lighter and some medium tanks. But of course, it's one of those situations where you pay for what you get, right? The 75mm gun is less than a point per half track, so you can't really expect too much. But very interestingly, the flamethrowers as well as the 75mm guns and the mortars, they still come with machine gun. The typical machine guns with the ROF of 3, whether it's stationary or moving, anti-tank of 2, firepower of 6, and 16-inch range. So you still actually have some built-in anti-infantry firepower in these 3 variants as well, which unfortunately the flags do not have, which is a little bit misleading because some people may see the machine gun at the back of the triple and think that, oh, does it still have a machine gun? But unfortunately it does not. Now, I'm sure many of you are interested in the points, but I'm not going to get quite to that yet because I do want to illustrate something before I get there. So I'm going to do this by showing all of you kind of, it's not a full list, it's not a complete list, it's just kind of something that you can do with these companies. I'm going to be using the Panzer Grenadier company simply because you can basically shove more half-tracks into the Panzer Grenadier company. But again, if you want to, you can always use the Assault company instead. Now, let's do it this way, shall we? Let's say I wanted to build something with this company. I start with, of course, my compulsory choices of a HQ, and for the platoon, let me go with just 5 teams. So that's just going to be 3 half-tracks down there. And for the second slot and for all the other slots, I'm going to fill it in all the way with triple 15mm flags. Moving forward, I think I'll just call them triple flags because I believe everyone understands. So we're talking about 3 platoons of 6 units each for a total of 18 half-tracks. Alright? Now let's squeeze in 4 75mm guns or 7.5 cm guns. And let's squeeze in the maximum platoon of flamethrowers. Alright? So that's a total of 32 half-tracks. Now I want all of you to guess how many points am I paying for 32 half-tracks? And of course, my infantry bases, right? 32 half-tracks. Pause for a moment. How many points do you think? Now if you guess around 30-ish points, you are correct. It is 36 points for this entire company because these half-tracks are really, really cheap. Of course, you can argue that, yeah, they're reluctant, trained, and aggressive. Of course, they're going to be cheap. But there is, of course, again, certain value in just flooding the board and saturating the board with armored choices. Maybe perhaps it's not something everyone wants to do, I understand, but it is nonetheless an option. And as I've alluded to in my article, and as I'll be talking about very shortly in this video as well, for those of you who don't like the reluctant, trained, and aggressive profiles, there's a way around it, alright? Now, with this kind of framework of 36 points, you can go in a lot of different directions. You could, for example, if your game allows multiple companies, which I believe most will, you could, for example, double up on this. For only 72 points, you have 64 half-tracks. And if you wanted to go really deep, you could, of course, add in more half-tracks as support. Or very likely what you will do is you kind of shore up your weaknesses in the list by bringing in some good anti-tank support. For example, your usual Tigers, 3 Tigers, come close to about the same number of points as well. Or of course, you could always take a pack friend which, just FYI, the A8mm Heavy AA Platoon is actually just a default support choice for the Bulge German force, so it's something to keep in mind as well. And you still have a lot of room to grow. For those of you keeping track, it's probably also worth knowing how much a minimum formation costs. So if you were to take a HQ Panzer Grenadier platoon of 5 teams and the 2 CM flags, that's only going to cost you 15 points. That's right, it's 15 points for a platoon that has 10 half-tracks. Of course, if you wanted to, you can always shove in, for example, flamethrowers, because I know some people in my local meta that love flamethrowers and they take flamethrowers with everything. Said person may not be a German player, but anyway, if you like more flamethrowers, of course, you can just shove that in and you just get 22 points. If you wanted to, you could take 4 companies, but again, it depends kind of your local meta, whether people actually allow so many companies. And again, I'm just giving ideas, right? So that's the number of points. Essentially, all the half-tracks in this book, with the exception of the flamethrower, they all cost less than a point each. The flamethrowers, as you can probably tell, 6 of them cost 7 points, so that's the one exception. The cheapest in the book being the 2CM flags, which cost only 4 points for a full platoon of 6. Of course, you're going to have to buy quite a few half-track. You're going to have to pay in quite a few half-track. If you're shopping, I should probably plug Blitz Minis, but really anywhere, your local game shop, go ahead. Now, if you wanted to keep everything within the company, then of course you do have the option of taking the tank hunters. So just very quickly, these tank hunters cost about 5 points per assault gun. This time around, I've remembered to call them assault guns. I'm not calling it a tank. Anyway, these come in platoons of 2 or 3. Let's be honest, you're probably going to be taking a platoon of 3 because 2 tank platoons are a little bit risky. They are reluctant, trained, and aggressive as well. And they're not the most heavily armored things, but they have passable armor with a front armor of 9. And they do have bazooka skirts for the sides. And they of course bring a very nice 40-inch range anti-tank 14 gun with firepower of 3+. So it's an option if you didn't want to spend too many points on support. If you wanted to make your companies really big and really chunky, it's going to be very hard to remove so many models, especially if you start adding in more armored infantry platoons. That's also an option in these companies as well. So in terms of interesting command cards, we have quite a number of them. You have noticed that in the platoons, you do have the option of taking 12 CM mortar platoons. They are just the infantry gun teams, right? But of course, you can opt to purchase a half-track for them for 1 point each. Gives them some potential mobility if you want it, but also kind of adds a little bit of ablative armored wounds, I guess you could call it, to your platoon if you wanted to. The Stuka Zufas, unfortunately, doesn't have a model this edition, as in like you don't put it on the table, but you can nonetheless call for support from off the table. What happens is that functionally, you use your 12 CM mortar platoons to call for it. It's going to be a 36-inch range salvo with an anti-tank of 3 and firepower of 2+, which is pretty sweet. And infantry teams in the Brigade Armored Panzer Grenadier platoon, keeping in mind not the assault platoon. Only the Panzer Grenadier platoons can potentially upgrade themselves to get 3+ dig-in and the ability to cross minefields on 3+ for just 1 point. And the assault platoons, on the other hand, as well as the 2CM flags and triple 15mm flags, can become confident if you wanted to, although they lose third right. And very importantly, you have the option of upgrading the assault platoons, the Panzer Grenadier platoons, and your mortar platoons to confident, veteran, and careful, the flamethrowers to reluctant, veteran, and careful, because flamethrowers tend to be reluctant. And all of these, I didn't really mention the points out here simply because it kind of scales depending on how big your platoons are. But long story short, in some cases, especially for those where you upgrade it to confident, veteran, and careful, you're almost, but not quite, you're almost doubling the points. So it becomes a question of, well, how much do you want these upgraded platoons? Some people, of course, prefer playing with elite units. That's up to you. But if you don't want to, you can always just, field twice, almost twice the number of models on the table and just push them at your opponent and ask them to deal with it. It's really up to you. It can be a whole bunch of different reasons. Also, if you, of course, play with the unupgraded versions, you're going to have to paint a lot of half-tracks. That's something I think that many of us are going to be like, do I really want to paint upwards of 70 half-tracks? But it is an option for those of you who want to just drown the board in half-tracks. I love half-tracks, but even then, I'm not sure if I want to paint so many. Alright, so that's it. I hope that this video has been helpful in certain ways. If you like this content, please do subscribe, please do comment, please do share and like. And of course, I also have a lot of information down below to my aforementioned article, as well as some of my other social media platforms. I'm trying something a little bit different with these videos. I'm not just doing all painting. Sometimes I want to also do some of these topics where I talk about the games. If you'd like to buy me a coffee, you can always please do check out my coffee membership. I also give one-on-one painting classes for those of you who are interested. I do hopefully have a video about that coming up soon, because one of my students allowed me to record the session and share certain parts of it, just so that all of you hopefully get to see a little bit what it's like. So again, I hope that this video has helped all of you. Thank you and take care.